Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Iselhart, a public historian specializing in researching and interpreting childhood. Specifically, I focus on the study of girlhood throughout all time periods, with a personal passion for the medieval and early modern. Today, we are going to cover medieval childhood, but not in Europe. In Module 1, we went in depth on medieval European childhood, because let's face it, history has largely been written by white European men who forgot the rest of the world existed. So let's get cracking that terrible notion with some thoughts about the rest of the medieval world. Outside of Europe is, well, a really big world. And when we're talking medieval, we're talking the 1,000 years between 500 and 1500 CE. There were vast movements of people and cultures during this time, from the Vikings invading parts of Europe and the Americas to the Silk Road connecting China to Africa and Europe. It would be a nearly impossible task to cover every culture present in the world during this time frame. So today I'd like to point you to a few interesting stories from outside of medieval Europe. We're going to start in Africa, which Western history has typically called a dark continent without history. Even in 2007, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy stated in a speech in Dakar that it was a shame Africa, quote unquote, has not fully entered into history. Well, throw that notion out the window. Totally untrue. Africa, in fact, has one of the longest histories in the world, and the cultures of the medieval period were as vibrant and diverse as any others. They were also conversing with Europe and other parts of the world. No one in the medieval world was truly isolated, and a lot of archaeological and documentary finds demonstrate this. This also includes Africa, which, according to this 1554 map made just after the medieval period, had many nations and tribes present on the continent. Today we're looking explicitly at childhood. For Africa, the primary method of knowing about medieval childhood is archaeology, because most African cultures of the time were oral cultures. That is, they passed knowledge down through oral histories rather than written documents. So this makes studying childhood challenging, firstly because there aren't a lot of written sources, and secondly because childhood itself is so rarely studied independently of other parts of society. This tunic from Egypt was radiocarbon dated to around 660 to 880 CE, towards the beginning of the medieval period. Egypt had long been connected to Europe, but also to the rest of Africa, a place of trade connections, and empires. While the empire of ancient Egypt had been gone for some time, people still lived in Egypt. During the medieval period, Egypt was contested territory by the Byzantine, Sasanian, and Arab armies, each having a short lived rule until Byzantine forces prevailed and established a capital at Cairo. This one was worn by children up to adolescence and was tailored. It was cut from several pieces of red woolen cloth, and a small slit at the hems left open for movement. The neck is decorated with an applied border of motifs and a zigzag design, which also occur on the cuffs. What these designs mean is debated and likely a local trend of the time, but this style of dress was very popular for children and found in red, blue, or blue green colors. It was likely worn under another highly decorated garment, this outer tunic, also from Egypt about the same time period. The hood offered protection from heat, cold, or dust, and it was also brightly colored, originally being purplish with green fringe. It was likely worn by a 7 or 8-year-old. While I'm not a fashion historian, one thing that pops out on the tunic speaks volumes. The ornamental bands on the lower edge and sleeves show stylized figures that look like they are dancing. These are very similar to figures associated with the cult of Dionysus, which began in Roman times, actually technically ancient Greek times, and extended into early Christianity. Dionysus was the ancient Greek god of fertility and festivity, eventually becoming the Roman god Bacchus. He is based on an even older god from either Mycenae or Minoa, both ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean, or possibly from a more ancient African religion. We're not really sure. He was reintroduced to Egypt by the Ptolemy rulers, think Cleopatra, in the 3rd century BCE, and continued up until about the 600s, the very start of the medieval period, right when this garment was made. Why a child's garment would link to the god of fertility and festivity is a question I have yet to answer. While it's quite hard to find facts about childhood in early medieval Africa, there are some hints from other African cultures that tell us about childhood. For example, in the Mali Empire, which peaked in the 1350s, sources say that men and women shared workloads. Girls would help harvest and process food, make pots and baskets, and tend livestock. Mali was also one of the most important trading centers in the world, and its cities featured vast libraries and Islamic universities. The Mali Empire was a semi democratic government with one of the world's oldest constitutions, the Kurokan Fuga of 1235, which notably recognized age groups, with each age group comprising a period of 3 years in succession. And it also gave those who were not young or elderly the right to participate in quote unquote important decisions. It also stated explicitly that everybody has a right to life and to the preservation of physical integrity, thus making no distinctions of age or gender in their human rights. Other articles placed high importance on children's education, making it a communal responsibility, and allowed marriage upon a girl reaching puberty without age determination, and for boys, marriage upon reaching age 20, with a fixed dowry of 3 cows. Whether this was all reality is debated, as the Kurokan Fuga was passed down in oral history for over 700 years before being written down. Next, we travel to China, where the Song dynasty ruled from 960 to the 1270s. During this time, the population doubled in size and rice cultivation expanded rapidly. Social life was vibrant, with great trade, public festivals, and the spread of literature and knowledge through woodblock printing and movable type, both invented in the early 11th century. For children, it was a mostly peaceful and vibrant time. As you can see in this painting, children participated in Song cultural life. There, children are recreating a puppet show in the early 12th century. Children also attended schools and temples for their education, and people of all social classes benefited from social welfare programs such as state run retirement homes, medical clinics, and a postal service. Even for rural peasant children, life was relatively pleasant. Their parents likely owned the land or were tenant farmers, providing a level of family stability. Women wielded considerable social and legal privileges, so girls were able to attend school and, in some cases, own property. In fact, girls were provided with such good education that many accomplished Song dynasty men attributed their success to the education their mothers gave them and helped them achieve, while other women became famed poets and writers. So life for a child was relatively good. They participated in cultural life, were able to pursue a full education regardless of gender, and faced a variety of occupations to choose from, though girls largely were still expected to marry. Yet, not all of medieval China was peaceful. In the 14th century, the Yuan dynasty, part of the Mongol Empire, took power. Notably, this dynasty was the height of the Silk Road. Since they controlled nearly all of Asia, they were facilitating a flow of people, goods, and ideas that resulted in lots of cultural clashing and change. But trade also brought tragedy, especially for children. For example, the Mongol practice of debt slavery, selling children to pay one's debts, was common. So children were often sold to other parts of the empire in order for parents to pay their debts. Open trade also prompted the spread of disease, and during the 14th century, China lost approximately 30% of its population to epidemics of plague. Our next stop is across the Pacific to Central America, specifically the Maya civilization, which had flourished in Central America since 2000 BCE and would continue to flourish until about 900 CE, when they collapsed for unknown reasons and dispersed into localized tribes that still exist today. Now the stuff of legend, the Maya were a complex society where gender was ambiguous. Based on evidence from Spanish missionaries who first encountered the Maya, we know that they likely had clear gender roles. Until recently, we assumed that these roles were similar to our own modern Western gender roles. Yet new evidence is revealing that girls were important in society and may have been rulers and high priestesses. An interesting aspect of Mayan society is that they were highly literate from a young age. Over their nearly 3,000-year reign, the Mayan people developed over 30 different languages and a common but highly complex writing system of hieroglyphic scripts. The Maya also had a system for mathematics and calendaring. The first concept of zero was created by the Maya, And they developed a complex calendar that recorded the lunar and solar cycles, eclipses, and movement of the planets. This high degree of literacy suggests a centralized system of schooling. Representations of female scribes in Mayan art have survived, and these women called themselves ajtizib, or one who writes and paints. However, we are not sure how many female scribes actually existed or whether it was common for girls to attend school. Unfortunately, it is hard to study Mayan childhood. Mayan society went through many periods of growth and collapse, often building over previous sites or letting sites succumb to the jungle. Additionally, the arrival of the Spanish in 1512 meant that many Mayan artifacts and sites were destroyed. But scholars are beginning to delve deeper into Mayan childhood, recognizing that their society was gendered but fluid, and that both girls and boys had opportunities not seen in other parts of the medieval world. Finally, we're going to finish in Hawaii with one of my personal favorites, hula girls. You heard that. And no, I am not talking about bra wearing, grass skirted young women handing out lays. These hula girls were real, and they had immense power. Arriving around 1000 CE, the descendants of the Lapita in the Pacific settled in what is now Hawaii. A late medieval civilization, they flourished on the islands, for a time connected to their ancestral South Pacific homelands, but gradually becoming a distinct culture isolated from most of the world as far as we know. Particularly, childhood is found on the island of Taui, at what is now Hyannis State Park. The story is one recounted in Chapter 2 of Exploring American Girlhood and 50 Historic Treasures, which is part of the recommended reading for this module and personally authored by moi. But to sum it up, the story of Hawaii is largely told through oral histories, including stories that are based in the landscape itself. At Hyannis State Park, the landscape of the parklands tell a story about how girls became the primary transmitters of Hawaiian culture through the legend of Hiaka. Hiaka was part of a family of demigods, believed to be real people with immense mana, or spiritual power. The family were some of the first settlers of Hawaii, and chose to make their home on the Big Island. In the legend of Hiaka, she is taught the hula by her friend, who dies young, and Hiaka takes the tradition with her when she marries Chief Loehau, spending her natural life on the island of Taui. There, she and Loehau established the first hula seminary, known as a heiau, which is historically attributed to her friend, who took over when Loehau died. I'm going to apologize right now if I'm getting some of these wrong and you know it. I'm not very good at pronouncing Native Hawaiian language. This legend, however, is based in fact. The seminary is still present on the island today and was used for centuries to train children in the art of hula. Hawaiians came from all over the islands to seek hula training, establishing additional schools throughout the islands. Children, notably but not exclusively girls, lived isolated for years in these schools, undergoing strict teaching and rituals that taught them the entire cultural tradition of costumes, postures, gestures, and chants. These chants are integral to Hawaiians' ancestral culture, containing the histories, legends, genealogy, and cosmology of their people. All of this began when they were children, and it was typically adolescents who graduated from the schools and sought positions within royal households or as traveling troops who became the honored keepers of Hawaiian history and culture. Where other societies looked to their elders, Hawaiians looked to their children, especially their girls, as keepers of their cultural traditions. What these non European cultures tell us is that medieval childhood was a varied experience. Every culture saw childhood as a distinct phase, but how that phase was seen socially could vary drastically. Some, like in China, seemed very similar to childhood today. Others, like those found on the American continents, were given educational opportunities and expected, regardless of gender, to advance to positions of cultural importance by young adulthood. That's it for our exploration of childhood in the Middle Ages beyond Europe. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you for watching.